The following presentation by Monument Capital Management LLC is intended for general information purposes only. No portion of the presentation serves as the receipt of or as a substitute for personalized investment advice from Monument or any other investment professional of your choosing. Please see additional information disclosure at the end of this presentation. A copy of Monument's current written disclosure brochure discussing our advisory services and fees is available upon request or at www.monumentwealthmanagement.com.
You don't want to get too locked into a plan. We know plans get stale like the minute they're created. Got to have that balance between a plan that's flexible and also feeling confident in where your income is actually going to be coming from.
Welcome back to Off the Wall Podcast, a podcast where we talk about all the things that Wall Street isn't talking about, or at least for the most part, and very exciting. This is our 75th episode, so a little bit of a milestone there. I'm David Armstrong, the CEO of Monument Wealth Management, and today I'm joined with my partner, Emily Harper, who's the Chief Strategy Officer here at Monument. Emily, welcome to the pod.
Hi, thank you. It's exciting to be here for number 75, and we'll give you a little hint on what today's theme is all about. Dave, a little trivia for you. Why is the number 75 important in retirement planning?
See, because I'm 30 years away from retirement, I haven't really thought that question through, but I'm going to go with it's the age where you have to start taking required minimum distributions, which are mandatory distributions out of your tax advantaged accounts.
Yeah. So for young people like us, Dave, that is the age.
Right.
It varies, but we're at 75. So very exciting to have that little crossover with today's episode being number 75.
Right. So let's just assume, for the sake of having, a good podcast with good information and everything, let's just assume I'm 58 years old, right? So I'm kind of in that gray area, not with my hair, but just in life, where I'm, I could conceivably be in the 5-year window of having to start to think about retirement. And in actuality, I have started to think about it more and more just because I have friends who are actually retiring now. God bless them. I don't know what they're doing with their lives, but there they are in retirement age. And one of the things that I start to think about is, how do I move out of a world where I'm working and I'm getting a paycheck and I have this income coming into the house, and some of that income is going towards saving towards my retirement portfolio, and I'm looking at all that, it's growing, and that's all on track, and I'm happy with that. But then all of a sudden I have to mentally shift towards replacing that paycheck, like how do I create, and I kind of know the answer to this, right? But I want us to talk about it, and I want listeners to understand, like, how do you actually start to create that paycheck in retirement? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And so why don't we just get into it?
Great.
Awesome. Let's first talk about the mindset shift, right? I mean, I think there's a real fear that people have when they start talking about their money. And when you've built up, hopefully, millions of dollars of assets for retirement, I mean, there's this I was just saying, is this massive psychological shift that takes place. But it just doesn't happen overnight, right? It kind of snowballs over time. And then you enter into this time where all of a sudden all of these accounts that you've been saving and investing and growing over time, you've got to start drawing down on those things. So now all of a sudden everything that you've been seeing grow is now like going to start coming down in value. And I think that's a huge psychological issue. What do you attribute that to?
Yeah, I mean, you hit on this a little bit, Dave, but when you're working and you're building, people are used to measuring success by what they accumulate in their working years. They see their net worth grow year over year. They're really disciplined with their saving and investing, and it feels good to see that balance sheet growing.
Right.
You've spent 30 plus years, well, maybe just 10 for you, Dave, because you're really far from retirement, but
right.
They've spent 30 plus years building that muscle memory around saving. And now we're asking them to flex a muscle they've barely used, which is intentionally spending their savings.
Right.
So you can do all the statistical analysis in the world showing someone that they have a very low likelihood of outliving their assets at a certain spending amount or lifestyle, but it's really hard to undo that muscle memory just by showing some numbers and data. It has to become a really lived experience where you're making that change. There's actually an interesting study that I think really highlights this. The Employee Benefit Research Institute found in 2022 that 83% of retirees feel financially secure, but only 53% feel comfortable spending their savings.
Yeah, I can relate to that because, again, I've been working so hard to accumulate all these assets and watching them grow, and that's been my focus. And because of the tax laws, I can't take that money out without massive penalties, so it's just basically locked up. But then all of a sudden, I'm going to go where I am very intentionally spending my money right now that comes in on my paycheck. I'm going to have to be very intentional about replicating that paycheck out of my tax advantage accounts and watching those accounts probably go down in value, and that can be a little scary. But that data that you just talked about is really telling, and frankly, it's a little surprising. Even if you're a person like me, but anybody listening who's spent their entire professional life looking at data, and when you make high impact decisions based on data. When it comes down to your personal life and your financial security, I mean, even the most smart and successful people, I'm reticent to throw myself into that group of people, but for the
I
sake
think you
of
can
a good,
go there, Dave.
Okay, for the sake of a good podcast, right? Let's just assume that I'm going to throw myself into that. People have a hard time trusting the numbers, even me. Right, because I do this every single day, and I see the numbers and I see the statistics, and then I think about, my God, I'm going to start pulling all this money out of my portfolio. So I think me and people listening who are entering into that gray area or actually into retirement, I mean, they still worry that they're missing something, right? Like even me, I still worry that I'm missing something. So the fear of the unknown, I was joking with Dean the other day that I live in fear of waking up every single day and in fear that, our company goes out of business or something bad happens. I mean, it's just for 25 years, I just always worry about the what if scenario. And I think that's going to personally carry over into my retirement. So, what do you think is driving that distrust of the data or the second guessing of yourself or the constant worry? By the way, don't worry, Monument's not going out of business.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that, Dave.
But I'm just saying that I mean, it's just a natural fear, right?
Yeah.
Unfounded, completely unfounded. But there it is.
I think so much of it is really just how we plan for retirement. So much focus and attention goes into answering questions like, when can I retire? Or what do I need to do to get there? Which makes sense when people are in that accumulation phase. You're busy. And look, if we were to sit you down at age 40 and say, here's the plan for exactly where all of your income is going to come from in retirement, that plan could change the next day. So it's somewhat futile to try to start planning for that paycheck and the logistics of that when you're so far out for retirement. But when you do get closer to retirement, if you haven't been thinking about at least a high level, how are all of these pieces going to work together, you just see you have a balance sheet full of a lot of different assets. You maybe have a vague idea of what you want retirement to look like, how you want to spend your time, what you want your lifestyle to be, and maybe you have an idea of how much you need or want to spend. That changes a lot over time. But it's really hard to translate that balance sheet into a retirement full of experiences and fulfillment and spending with intention on the things that matter most to you. So that's why we like to start the conversation about how to pull everything together a few years before you retire. So you can enjoy these things, these experiences, when you no longer have the psychological security of a paycheck coming in. But it's a really tough balance to strike between not getting too locked in to a plan. Dave, I always think you have this funny stone that we might have hidden during the move.
I wonder where that went.
We used to keep in our planning room that said nothing is written in stone or nothing is set in stone.
Which was funny because it was a stone with the writing on it, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So
Dave thinks it's really
I thought
funny.
it was kind of cute, but I guess it got lost.
But you don't want to get too locked into a plan. We know plans get stale like the minute they're created. Got to have that balance between a plan that's flexible and also feeling confident in where your income is actually going to be coming from.
Right. So ideally, it's great to be proactive. I get that. Right. And that's kind of what we're espousing here. And I'm trying to be proactive too. So ideally, people are doing this 3 to 5 years before their career ends to create that option-rich life. As we like to say, we also like to say nothing's written in stone and then write it on a stone and then hide it from me. But that's for another point. So it's really great to be proactive. But I'll share with you, I've seen this a lot just with my friends and just being in the industry for over 25 years. You see this. There's some people that really do plan it out, and they know they're like, okay, when I do get to retirement, I'm going to take the 2 houses that I have and sell them both and take the equity of that and buy a house for cash and they start to project out what their expenses are going to look like, and they're able to extrapolate how much they need out of their portfolio. And then there's people who just maybe it's because they've been laid off, right? And they've decided, okay, I've been laid off or something's happened in my job and I'm at retirement age anyway, so I'm going to retire, and they haven't done any planning. And now all of a sudden it's this panic, and they really don't know, and that creates a lot of anxiety because they're equating what their lifestyle is like when they're working to what their lifestyle will be like when they're retired, and those two things don't normally match up. Like I don't think my retirement life is going to have the expense structure associated with it that my life has right now. And I think it's like that for a lot of people.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah, right. So walk us through what needs to be done 3 to 5 years out to create that option-rich life that our clients are so interested in having. And by the way, me too, just as an aside.
Yeah. So, living that option-rich life in retirement really comes down to making that mindset switch so you can feel comfortable spending the wealth that you've worked so hard to build. And tactically, that starts by getting some help figuring out how to recreate your paycheck in retirement.
Right.
I love the story that you shared, Dave, about people who have these, 2 houses and they're going to sell them and have that liquidity for something else. But that still doesn't really get at how am I paying myself day to day? Like, how do I feel comfortable saying yes to this vacation? Or how do I feel comfortable just even knowing, like, where's my cash coming from to go out to dinner or to pay my mortgage? So first, it's really about wrapping your arms around everything that you have. Gone are those days of you work for a company for 40 years, you retire, and you start your pension, and you just live off of that, and it carries you through the rest of your life. The reality for current and future retirees is that you're going to have a patchwork of assets and benefits that you've accumulated over the years. And you have to step back to understand how everything will work together. It's a lot more complex, unfortunately, than, okay, I'm going to start this pension and it's going to pay me forever and I don't have to worry about anything. Chances are if you're, an executive, you've contributed to things like deferred compensation plans that are going to pay out over a number of years. And you've also been saving in other types of accounts. So how does everything work together? There's also different tax treatment for different accounts and different timelines for when you can or have to start tapping into different accounts or sources. So it gets really complicated when you're just looking at the numbers and trying to decide, where to start. So something I actually like to do with clients, it's very simple, but I've heard from so many people that they like this. I like to visually map out retirement as a timeline, at least like the first 10 years or so, because I think, the first couple of years, that's when there's just so much uncertainty about what is this actually going to look like? What is this actually going to feel like? But I like to map out when different kinds of income will start, like Social Security, those required minimum distributions that we talked about. You have different things that are kicking in at different times. Maybe you have distributions from deferred compensation plans that usually have to be paid out either in, a few installments over a set number of years or in one lump sum, which PSA, don't opt for lump sum if at all possible. That's a tax disaster to get a huge payout all at once from something you've been deferring taxes on for years.
Sounds like an educational video in the making.
Yeah, maybe. But beyond mapping out those fixed sources of income as a starting point, I also like to layer in the expected spending year to year, because very rarely will you spend the same amount year in and year out. Maybe in that first year of retirement, you've got the big milestone trip that you want to do. I just talked to clients who are going to the Maldives for a big retirement celebration for themselves. So we find that in those earlier years of retirement, a lot of people call these the go-go years.
Okay.
You're maybe traveling a lot more. You're saying yes to experiences that you were just too busy for when you're working. So when you say, I don't think my retirement lifestyle is going to cost as much as my lifestyle now, you could be very surprised by what that actually ends up looking like, not to mention things like healthcare costs that you're now covering that were part of a plan before. So when you map everything out all together on one timeline, it really starts to help you figure out, okay, what do I actually need to cover from these other assets that I've built up?
Right. In the interest of getting some free financial planning advice from you directly right now on the spot, right? I'm just thinking about myself, right? So I have real estate that I own and have mortgage on, but eventually in retirement, I could sell those and satisfy the mortgage and walk away with some equity. I've got taxable accounts, right? I've got tax advantage accounts, my retirement savings accounts, and all the things that you just talked at, that's ultimately really great for backing into how much I'm going to need to pull from my investment accounts, right? And start planning from there. I get that, but there's just so much more complexity to it, right? To figure out where that money is going to come from. So if those are my asset buckets, I'm just going to call them, and we can back into how much money I'm going to need on a monthly basis to sustain my lifestyle that I choose to have through a very rigorous financial planning process that we're going through right this very second on the spot. But but you also have to figure out where that money is going to come from and how it's going to be taxed, right? Because even if you have tax advantage accounts, the way you get money out of those tax advantage accounts could be taxed differently depending on if you have a regular traditional IRA or a Roth or anything like that. So, I mean, that's kind of what everything you said just made me think of that.
Yeah, well, you're going to love my answer, Dave, because it's the typical responsible wealth advisor answer.
I can spend as much money as I want in retirement. I'm fine.
No, it depends. Every situation is going to be different because it's going to be driven by what you've built when you're accumulating and what your 401k balance looks like. If you have a lot of money that you deferred in pre-tax accounts like 401ks or maybe IRAs, we want to be really mindful about how we're tapping into that and how much we're taking from those a year, because those are taxed as ordinary income, which if you think about the tax brackets, that's where your ordinary income comes into play. So when you think about rates like 24, 32, 35, 37%, depending on how much income you have, ordinary income, you could be creating a pretty big tax bill for yourself in retirement if you're only leveraging your pre-tax accounts. We might look at withdrawing from a combination of accounts. With different accounts having different tax consequences, we have to go a layer deeper to look at what's going to be the most tax efficient over your entire retirement timeline, not just this year or next. So that's where things like those required minimum distributions come into play. We know that's a liability down the road that we're going to have to account for from a taxable distribution standpoint. Does it make sense to start taking some money from those pre-tax accounts sooner than when you're required to spread that tax bill out over time and smooth that out? Or does it make sense to primarily use your general investment or brokerage accounts where you're paying capital gains taxes on your earnings when you withdraw them? So there's really no one-size-fits-all plan or answer when you have the complexity that clients like ours have.
Right.
I think to a recent scenario I've had where, this client has been deferring a lot of money into deferred compensation plans because they are in that 37% tax bracket right now. So it's made sense for them to try to put as much as they can pre-tax into their deferred comp plan in addition to maxing out their 401k. And they've done a pretty good job of building up general investment accounts along the way too. So we are going to have a really nice, flexible, planning roadmap for them in terms of how they're going to get their income each year, because we have different types of accounts we can tap into, and we can try to project what's going to be the most tax efficient over this 30+ year timeline for you.
Right. That's really interesting because it just made me think that true. And I'm going to make an extreme example here, but based, kind of on the scenario that you just painted. If you just think okay, I need 10 grand a month, 15 grand a month in my retirement to sustain the lifestyle that I figured out I want to have through the planning process 20 years ago or even 15 years ago. I'm just going to take $10,000 a month out of my accounts. Well, that $10,000 could end up being $7,500 on an after-tax basis, or maybe even $6,000 on an after-tax basis, because you're not strategically removing it from the right account at the right time, right? It's not just again, an extreme example is I could say, okay, I'm going to take 10 grand a month, and I go into my investment account that has just been rebalanced, and all of a sudden now I'm taking a whole bunch of short-term capital gains by removing that $10,000. So there's definitely a strategy, but I'm wondering, are there other strategies or approaches that you've seen work for people, or even more importantly, and I love this, ones that don't work?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, we like flexibility when it comes to meeting cash needs throughout retirement, because things are going to change. As much as we try to plan for them, the reality is going to be different year to year. So, some pitfalls we've seen people coming into retirement who have focused on creating as much fixed income as possible through things like annuities or other investment products, either because they want that security of the guaranteed income. They're so afraid of this idea of, I'm going to have to start living off of my assets, or because they're trying to win at the tax minimization game. Annuities, you're able to defer your taxes over time, and then when you make withdrawals, those will be taxable. So sometimes people fear investing in general investment or brokerage accounts because they don't want to deal with the taxable interest year to year. But either way, whether you're just trying to get guaranteed income, as much guaranteed income as possible, or minimize taxes as much as possible along the way, there's always a give and take. This takes away some element of flexibility if you haven't built up as much in some of those non-tax deferred accounts like brokerage accounts. So we really like to work with clients not only at the point of mapping out where am I getting my income from in retirement, but making those choices along the way that are going to help them have that flexibility when they get to that point. Because the reality is spending fluctuates significantly in retirement. And trying to lock in a set amount of income can be very limiting. I have another little study. I always love the JP Morgan Guides to Retirement because they have so much data. It's so interesting. But they had a stat that compared to the year before retirement, 60% of new retirees experienced spending volatility in the first 3 years of retirement, and that this continues throughout retirement, with 50% of retirees aged 75 to 80 experiencing spending volatility from year to year. So you can start to see how if you're trying to just plan to this guaranteed income number, you're not giving yourself the room to adjust potentially as things change, as you experience shocks in spending, or this can also be a very uncomfortable place to be when we see spikes in inflation. That fixed income might be worth significantly less 10 years down the road than it was when you started taking it from your annuity. And I'm not here to beat up on annuities. I think they can definitely have a place in someone's retirement portfolio, but fixating on I want to create as much fixed income as possible, or putting things into these products because they defer taxes, just makes the flexibility aspect a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, you mentioned life insurance before, and I'll segue and then come back to a question for you on that. But when I think of life insurance, this is just my perspective on things, but I look at life insurance not as an investment product, but as literally like insurance. Like you have insurance on your car, you have insurance on your house, and I like to use the term insurable interest, right? So you have an insurable interest in ensuring that you have insurance on your house. So if the house burns down or something happens, this huge asset that you have a mortgage on, likely have a mortgage on everything, can be replaced. Car, if you hurt somebody or you total your car, your insurable interest. With life insurance, I look at the insurable interest being your salary or your spouse's salary. And if it went away tomorrow based on a catastrophic event, that there is insurance in place that will be able to give you enough assets to replicate that salary for a certain amount of time so that you don't have to start liquidating houses because you can't pay the mortgage because you don't have two incomes anymore. I mean, I look at insurance through the lens of an insurable interest. And so with that said, you did mention some of the other investment products. I'm wondering if you can share your opinion on, and I'll just kind of pick on, life insurance retirement plans because they're very popular. And it's counter to what my perspective is, which is like, you're not really solving for an insurable interest. You're just trying to create an investment product.
Yeah. So I think there's an element of both of those things in something like a life insurance retirement plan. So just for some terminology here, typically a life insurance retirement plan consists of a permanent life insurance policy that you purchase. So permanent just means there's that death benefit component covering the insurable interest, and then some cash value or investment component where some of the premiums that you pay for the policy actually go towards building up this cash value or this investment component versus a term life insurance policy where we're really just trying to cover that insurable interest.
Right.
And the reason people like these permanent policies is there's some tax advantaged element to them. Similar to the annuities like I referenced, you're not paying taxes on interest or dividends along the way inside of the policy. And then these products take it a step further where when you reach retirement and you have a need for income, you can actually take loans from these policies and they're considered tax-free withdrawals, assuming the policy meets some certain standards. We're not going to get into all of that right now.
But they exist.
And people get very excited about this idea of, wow, I can defer money while I'm working and earning and it's not going to be taxed. And then in retirement, when I don't know what the tax situation is going to be, I can tap into this tax-free. In reality, I've seen a lot of these not work the way that people expect them to when they first make the purchase. They get an illustration that shows, wow, by retirement, I could be withdrawing $100,000 a year tax-free from this. Why wouldn't I do this? That assumes that the investments are going to behave exactly as illustrated. And we know in reality that's not always the case. Even just the date on when certain indices are evaluated for determining the return in your investment component, it can be very complicated. And we have seen people get somewhat disappointed with how these actually perform in reality. So again, I'm not here to beat up on life insurance. I think it can have a place in the right situation where you have significant amounts of cash flow that you're able to, invest in these. They're a component of your plan, not the entire plan. But in practice, we tend not to really work with a lot of these policies because we do prioritize that element of flexibility. And we do see taxes as a reality. I mean, when you get too cute with taxes or try to let the tax tail wag the dog, you sometimes make decisions that are counter to what you're trying to accomplish. Or expensive.
Yeah.
We haven't even talked about the cost of life insurance, and that's definitely a component of it. This could be a whole separate episode.
I was going to say, it sounds like another educational video. Yes.
But it's just somewhat limiting. That's the theme of what we're talking about here. You don't want to limit yourself going into retirement. Similarly limiting is when people fixate on only living off of the income that their portfolio generates. So we hear this a lot when talking to clients. They'll say, we don't want to touch the principal. We don't want to sell investments. We only want to take the interest or the dividends that the portfolio is generating. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially if you have a portfolio that can generate enough interest and dividends. But it's just a bit myopic.
Right.
We encourage clients to think about what their portfolio is returning in total, not just the income that it's generating, because retirement is also maybe a 30, 40-year time horizon for people, and you still need that growth, especially if you have legacy goals or things beyond just living off of your portfolio in retirement, which so many of our clients do have those kinds of goals. So when we think about how we start to tap into a portfolio, it's not just the dividends and interest. Yes, we can get cash from a portfolio that generates income, but we can also sell positions to raise cash, ideally at a gain, or some combination of these things. But this is where the psychology comes into play a little bit. The idea of selling investments sounds bad when you've grown accustomed to building.
Right.
The last thing people do is want to sell their investments. Or it sounds like, oh, I'm dipping into my principal when you tell someone we're going to raise cash from your portfolio, because they see that high watermark at retirement. They're like, this is what my portfolio was worth at retirement. So if I touch anything from here on out, I'm taking principal. And that's just not the case. Because you have so much embedded growth in there, and you're going to continue to have growth in there. So believe it or not, it can actually be more tax efficient to raise cash by selling positions and paying gains at capital gains rates, because those are maybe 15 to 20% versus those ordinary income rates that go up to 37%. Sometimes having a portfolio that generates a lot of ordinary income isn't the best thing in retirement.
Right.
You're creating a big tax bill for yourself. So it's balancing all of these things. And then the last thing I'll say here is that when you're afraid to sell things in your portfolio to get the cash that you need to live off of, there's also some risk in underspending from an estate planning standpoint. If you're committed to not touching principal or taking gains, maybe you have a major legacy goal, but maybe you don't have kids. I don't have kids. You don't have kids. I don't have a major goal to leave money behind to anyone, maybe just some charities that I care a lot about. So when you're not taking into account, like, what's the money for, and you just enter retirement with this mindset of, I don't want to sell anything, there's actually risk in having too much money later in life.
Right.
And believe it or not, your spending is likely to decrease later in life because you just don't have the ability to travel and do the things that you're doing in those go-go years.
Right.
So you may end up feeling like you missed out on things that, when you were healthy and able to enjoy your wealth, you could have been doing if you're just myopic and fearful. So we really want to help people move beyond that mindset.
Right. Because, and we say this all the time, money can really only go one of four places. You can spend it in your lifetime, and to the extent that anything's left over after you die or second to die if you're married, it's going to either go to you, and you designate this, friends and family, charity, and in some cases, taxes.
Yep.
Right? So if you are in the mindset of not dipping into principal because you want to maintain this anchored, emotional level of whatever the portfolio was, you are foregoing a lifestyle now to afford somebody else to enjoy that lifestyle when you're gone, whether it's friends and family or charity or anything like that. And that's why we look at all of these different strategies that you just talked about from the investment side. We look at it as, how do we replenish that cash bucket? And if you think, I say the word cash bucket all the time, but in order to visualize this, if you're listening, I think of it more as like an accordion account, right? That increases and decreases as the accordion goes in and out. And that's where you fund your lifestyle out of, whether it's, hey, I need X amount of money on a monthly basis. Oh, and by the way, I want to take a vacation and it's going to cost me X thousands of dollars. So that accordion account will flex in and out. And you want to use all of those different mechanisms to accordion that cash account in and out, right? So you've got the word I want to use is total return. Let me define that. But total return is not only dividends and interest and all of that stuff, but it could be capital gains too. So how you generate the cash that you're going to spend, you should almost be agnostic to it, except for the tax piece of it. What is the most tax advantaged way to create that total return and get that cash out of the portfolio so that you can spend it? And that can come from dividends and interest, right? It can come from geez, required minimum distributions, right? Like in 40 years when I have to start doing my RMDs, that may go towards funding my own personal accordion account. And then what did I leave out there? Just capital gains, right? It's like selling things. So those three things are what we do, and we try to educate clients on. Is that creates a lot of flexibility. Creates a lot of flexibility because what it'll do is it'll account for those fluctuation in cash and spending needs and gets away from that. Like you were saying, I'm going to create this fixed income and I don't want to invade my principal because you and I without kids, and maybe this applies to even people with kids, but I'm operating on the die with a dollar in the bank strategy, not I don't ever want to dip into my principal because I'm not necessarily sure I want to fund anybody else's future lifestyle at the expense of my own.
Yeah. There's a great book called Die with Zero, if you haven't read it already.
I'm going to write the second version of that. It's called Die with a Dollar. But yes, right? Okay. So,
it's always responsible to have at least $1, right?
Exactly. That could be a copyright problem, but I'm going to work through the legal aspects of that with the Die and the Dollar book that will be coming out soon. But
just to put a finer point on the cash bucket idea, this is something that we find really effective. We want to have a cash bucket that holds about 12 to 18 months worth of cash that clients can draw from. Now, if you're used to that monthly paycheck and you like to see that money coming into your bank, you can replicate that with just a monthly transfer from that cash bucket to your bank. We're in a nice place right now where cash is actually earning interest if you're invested in a money market or some savings accounts. So you don't necessarily want to have everything you need for 18 months in checking. So some clients like to get that monthly transferred to their bank account. It still feels like they're getting that paycheck. It takes away that element of unpredictability. But the frequency can really be whatever works best. We have people that want it quarterly. We have people that say, just send me everything for the year. Whatever works.
It really makes the whole thing a lot easier to enjoy in retirement, which is kind of the whole point. And more importantly, the optionality that comes with it. So thank you all for listening today. I hope that the conversation with Emily has provided you with some clarity and confidence in taking your next step, intentionally, of course, and in a way that helps you make life option rich. So if you want more, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter at monumentwealthmanagement.com/subscribe. Look, and here's why that newsletter is worth it. I'll just rattle off a few things that make it great. You get access to our private Insights playlist on YouTube, which is really awesome and not available to the public. So there's all these little secret videos that you'll get to see. And I join the rest of the investment team every month for a bonus episode. So that's always fun. We talk about what's happening in the markets, and we keep an eye on what it all means for your portfolio. These videos are for newsletter subscribers only. So if you want to go in and sign up right now, again, it's monumentwealthmanagement.com/subscribe. And that's it for now. See you all next time on Off the Wall. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Emily, for joining me today.
Thank you.
The previous presentation by Monument Capital Management LLC was intended for general information purposes only. No portion of the presentation serves as the receipt of or as a substitute for personalized investment advice from Monument or any other investment professional of your choosing. Different types of investments involve varying degrees of risk. It should not be assumed that the future performance of any specific investment or investment strategy or any non-investment related planning services, discussion, or content will be profitable, be suitable for your portfolio or individual situation, or prove successful. Neither Monument's investment advisor registration status, nor any amount of prior experience or success should be construed that a certain level of results or satisfaction will be achieved if Monument is engaged or continues to be engaged to provide investment advice services. Monument is neither a law firm nor an accounting firm. No portion of its services should be construed as legal or accounting advice. No portion of the video content will be construed by a client or prospective client as a guarantee that he or she will experience a certain level of results if Monument is engaged or continues to be engaged to provide investment advisory services. A copy of Monument's current written disclosure brochure discussing our advisory services and fees is available upon request at www.monumentwealthmanagement.com.